it doesn't work to say you should give us our rights because we're normal like you. You know, you should give us our rights because we're not freaks. Like, that never works, because they always just see you as freaks anyway. What works is when we say we should have rights and we should be able to live the life that we want, because it's our fucking life. Hello, I'm Chris. Welcome to my video. It's extremely warm. I've just closed the window to try and stop any noise, but I may end up having to open it again because there's no air in here and it's very warm. So before we get onto the video, I just wanted to note the lipstick that's going on. I didn't know it was going to look like this when I put it on. This is the first time I've used this. No, that's a pen. Not I was going to show it, but that's a marker pen. It's like that colour when it goes on, and then it dries and goes like that, which I didn't know was going to happen, but I've been looking for a lipstick exactly this colour for fucking ages, so I'm quite happy. Okay, so now we've covered my lipstick and my face, let's talk about the title of this video, which is, do you need gender dysphoria to be trans? And I wanted to make this video to talk about this question, talk about what my answer to it would be, but also talk about the question itself and why it's a question that comes up a lot in these sorts of videos, the sort of ideas behind it. Just to answer the question for myself, I would say that anyone who feels that they are trans, who feels that they identify with the term trans and who wants to use that for themselves is trans. That's what I think. It's simple. And I just realised I didn't use my fucking microphone. Fuck. Completely forgot to set my microphone up because, like I said, I'm a fucking idiot. And see, this is why I'm currently trying to get an ADHD assessment, because of shit like this, because I can't fucking plan anything. Okay, so as I was saying, as far as I'm concerned, anyone who says that they're trans, who identifies as trans, who feels that that relates to them and describes their experiences is trans. That's how, that's my, you know, I'm pretty like hardline on that. So yeah, having said that, if I was going to define, or say to someone what I mean when I say a trans person, I would say someone whose gender is different from what they were assigned at birth, which I think is pretty all-encompassing. But having said that, I'm aware that, for example, not all non-binary people consider themselves trans. There's a lot of kind of culturally specific identities. For example, the Hijra of India, who don't consider themselves trans, but who have a gender which is different from their assigned gender. So, you know, in a sort of blanket, you know, when you're using these terms to sort of talk about groups of people, you kind of need some kind of definition. But I'm also very aware that lots of people identify with things in different ways, and I think that's cool. And I think that, you know, I'm not going to say who is and isn't trans, and I think the question of, as I will go on to say, the question of do you need gender dysphoria to be trans, or people saying that you do, is very much bound up with this transmedicalist ideology, which was around a lot when I was a kid, like a teenager, and sort of first getting into the trans world, and which I thought had kind of disappeared, but seems to have kind of re-emerged recently. I mean, it's possible it never went away, something that I'm very aware of with trans communities and things like that. It's not one community. I think these days it is a lot more connected. Like, we can communicate between different groups online. You know, we've got Twitter, which is kind of one big thing, but you know, I think there is still a certain amount of fragmentation. You know, there's different sub communities even within Twitter, but then also you've got, I don't know, different Facebook groups. You've got people on TikTok, which I downloaded it, I tried it confused and scared me. Send me the good TikToks and I'll enjoy it that way. Anyway, so yeah, I've sort of seen a reemergence of this transmedicalist ideology, which, for people who don't know, a brief thing of transmedicalism, or transmed for short, or true scum, as some people call it, which I will explain why in a minute. So if you ask a transmedicalist what transmedicalism is, they will say it's the belief that you need gender dysphoria to be trans. They don't say exactly what they mean by that, but by their through the way they talk about it and through the way they've talked to me about it, it basically seems to be anyone who they think doesn't seem to be trans in the right way is not really trans. Yeah, I've had very young trans guys tell me that they think... These are people I don't know. People who've just, like, interacted with me on Twitter, who've told me that I'm not really trans because... The reasons they give, because I'm okay with they-them pronouns. You know, I list my pronouns as he/they because I'm cool with either. Because I express in a not particularly masculine way, and I don't particularly identify with masculinity in that way, and because I don't hate my genitals. So if when they said that they were transmedicalists, what they actually meant was that they think you need gender dysphoria to be trans, then I would be the perfect, you know, I had a very physical gender dysphoria experience before I transitioned. My dysphoria, my experience of being trans was very much based on my body and my feelings about my body and wanting to change my body in that way. But apparently, because I'm not, it's not enough, because, I mean, one thing that, so with the pronoun thing, what the person was saying was that, they were basically saying, but they, them, that's a non-binary pronoun. So why would you be okay with using that if you're a man? Because it's for non-binary people. And I was like, well, it's not a non-binary pronoun. It's a non-gendered pronoun. So, you know, not everyone's okay with it. And, you know, not everyone likes using it, and that's fine. But for me, I am okay with it because... You know, well, I mean, essentially, my feelings of pronoun is as long as it's not she, her, then it's all good. Like, you know, if people wanted to use, like, neo pronouns for me, I'd be cool with that. And yeah, so that's basically my take on it. And I also think it's kind of silly that we have to declare someone's gender when we refer to them. So I think that if we just got rid of gendered pronouns completely, that would be great. So... but they didn't quite understand that, or they couldn't, you know, I think a lot of times they're very caught up in this very kind of binary, not necessarily binary, but very like set thinking. And then the other one, if one of my family members are watching, if you're watching, please switch off. I'm going to talk about sex things. Thank you. So they said that, so basically they were saying that because I'm not disgusted by my genitals, or because they were basically saying that for trans guys, in order to be really a trans man, the only thing stopping you from getting bottom surgery should be that the outcomes aren't very good. And that if, you know, to be really trans, you have to feel that if you could just press a button and get a penis, then you would do it, and that would be your ideal. And like, you know, I was like, I probably wouldn't, because I quite like what I have. You know, I'm very, like I said, family, switch off. Alice, turn off, thank you. I'm very much a bottom. I very much, maybe it's because I'm lazy. Who can say? But the fact is, I enjoy using what I have. Anal is it takes a lot of preparation to have anal sex. And I'm, sometimes you can't be bothered doing that. And you just want to, with protection, yeah, but, prepare in that way. But, you just want to do it. So, yeah, that's an insight about my sex life that I'm sure you all wanted to know. What was I talking about? Yes, gender dysphoria. So as I was saying, this is my experience with what I sort of see as this kind of new wave of young transmedicalists that have been coming up. I've seen quite a lot of stuff recently, kind of over the last few months. There's been a lot of talk about Calvin Garra, who, really shit person, has done a lot of shit stuff, has spread a lot of this very heavy transmedicalism stuff in the way that he's done it. He's been very abusive to people who he doesn't feel fit his idea of how trans people should be. And this is the thing as well. It's not just, do you experience gender dysphoria? Yes, cool, you're trans. No, you're not trans. It's looking at people and deciding whether they experience gender dysphoria based on how they look and based on what they do, and saying that gender dysphoria can manifest in very different ways. People can have dysphoria about the way that they're gendered, the way that the pronouns people use, the names people call them, the ways people talk about them, but not necessarily with their body. And I think that's the thing. I think that these transmedicalists, it's where the medicalist comes in. It's about the body, and it's about feeling like you need medical treatment to be. But then at the same time, it's not just that, because they talk about the way people dress and the way people talk. And yeah, this is where, like I said, the term true scum comes in, because it basically comes from the idea of the true transsexual. It's like, if you look and behave in a certain way and you want the right kinds of medical treatment, then you're a true transsexual. And if you don't, then you're not. And then there's this level of hierarchy between those. One thing I find really interesting when people start talking about this question of do you need gender dysphoria to be trans? And when people start having this discussion, so one thing that I find very interesting is what you don't see is people talking about what gender dysphoria is. And I feel like it's been very much co-opted by this kind of transmed narrative, where gender dysphoria is specifically a physical thing, and specifically not just a physical thing, but it's specifically about hating your body, and it's specifically about a physical thing. And it's not even something I've heard people say is that they don't necessarily realize that they experience gender dysphoria until they start transitioning, because once their body starts changing, they start feeling more comfortable in it, they start to realize how uncomfortable they felt in it before. And I think it's interesting how, when someone says, if people are arguing or disagreeing, if someone says, I don't experience, someone who's trans says, I don't experience gender dysphoria, someone might be like, oh, then you're not trans. Not, so can you, in a sort of good faith, inquisitive way, what is your experience of being trans? Obviously, people don't necessarily have to answer these questions, but I think that would be, if people were sharing their experiences of being trans and having these discussions in a kind of open and not a kind of, you need to justify it, tell me why you're trans, justify it, but in a let's share our thoughts and share our ideas. I think that would be much better for the community, and it would open up a lot more people's minds, you know. And in my experience, I talk about it in the video that I made. I'll link to it in a thing somewhere. Because the circles that I was in when I was first coming out as trans when I was a teenager were very transmed. That was all the stuff I found out about trans stuff. There wasn't even mention of anything outside of that. And then when I got into this much more open community, which was, you know, it was very queer. It was this kind of anarchist, squatter, queer space that was very informed by the kind of academic queer theory as well. There was a lot more talk about, you know, people were having discussions about their experiences of gender and their experiences of, I think that the line between being trans and being queer was a bit more blurry then as well, or being sort of, you know, non-binary wasn't really a term that was used, but to be queer was to be inherently non-binary in those communities. But yeah, I mean, I covered this a lot in the other video, but there was a lot of discussion about gender and discussion about how people felt that their gender was. And, you know, rather than telling each other, you should be feeling like this, or an accusation of you need to justify why you're queer and why you're trans, which, you know, I'd really like to see a lot more of. But I think that at the same time, things like Twitter are a really bad place to have those discussions. You know, it doesn't lend itself way to nuance, because, you know, how nuanced can you be in 240 characters, really? Yeah, another thing I kind of wanted to speak about was the idea, so what gender dysphoria actually is. Not the experience of it necessarily, but the definition and the term, and sort of where it's come from and why it's become so ubiquitous as the thing, and you know, transmedicalists being like, this is the thing that you need to have to be trans. So, you know, first of all, it's a medical diagnosis, but it's not. It's quite recent. I can't remember exactly. Wait. Wikipedia. So it was used as the diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5, which I think is the American one. I always get these things confused. But yeah, it was only used in 2013 as the actual diagnosis. It was used as a clinical descriptor of things before that, but it wasn't the actual diagnosis until 2013, which means I wasn't diagnosed with gender dysphoria. I can't remember exactly. I was either diagnosed with transsexualism or gender identity disorder, possibly both, because I was diagnosed twice. Because, you know, I don't know, so good they diagnosed him. So trans, they diagnosed him twice. There you go. Yeah, so so it was before that, you know, maybe someone would have said, like when I was a teenager, first starting getting into the trans scene, I didn't hear people say you need gender dysphoria to be trans. At least I don't remember that. What I was hearing people saying was things like, if you don't want to have, you know, if you don't want to have chest surgery, or if you don't want to go on testosterone, then you're not really trans. It was much more specifically about the actual medical treatments. But I think something that's interesting, that I found interesting about the term gender dysphoria, as well as the term transsexualism and gender identity disorder, is that basically, so the way that our medical system works, at least in the UK, is that you have to have a diagnosis to have treatment. If you don't have a diagnosis, there's nothing to treat, basically. Unless you're somewhere where you have access to informed consent. Unless you're somewhere where you have access to informed consent, you need to have a diagnosis in order for people to be able to medically transition. You know, I don't think that's good, because I think informed consent is the way forward, but that's the system that we have at the moment. So basically, people have to, the medical system, the people who do the medical stuff, they've been, they're trying to come up with terminologies which are basically a diagnosis, which means this person is trans and they want to transition. I think the NHS, get up the NHS description of gender dysphoria. So this is what's on the NHS websites, which isn't necessarily what's, obviously this is what they make to present to the public, not necessarily what they actually use to diagnose people. But what they say on the page for gender dysphoria is a term that describes a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. So it doesn't say anything in there about how that should manifest. It doesn't say anything about it being hating your body, or about, being disgusted by your body, or about how you should... about how it should manifest. It doesn't say it has to be physical. It just says a sense of unease because of a difference between your biological sex and your gender. So, it's very clear to me that this is a way for them to talk about being trans as a medical condition, not a medical condition, but as a diagnosis that they can then give people medical treatment for. So part of the whole transmedicalist ideology as well is the idea that not just you need to have gender dysphoria to be trans, but being trans is a medical condition. And I think that is in some ways putting the cart before the horse in a way, because gender dysphoria is, was created in order to... It kind of was created to medicalize trans people so that we can access transition, because we don't have informed consent. And some of the other definitions that I've seen of gender dysphoria is that it talks about it as clinically significant. So in order to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, it has to be a clinically significant unease, which basically is just a fancy way of saying that it's bad enough that you need to have, or that you are pursuing surgery or hormones or, medical transition. If they're talking about, in order to be diagnosed in a medical setting with gender dysphoria, it has to be at a point where it's clinically significant. But the thing is, if it wasn't clinically significant, like, the fact that you're pursuing medical transition is kind of the proof that it's clinically significant, because it's significant to a clinician because you're trying to get them to give you medical transition stuff. Does that make sense? I think so. So yeah, I just think it sort of comes from this this thing between the way the setup is now, needing a medical diagnosis, and then people identifying with that medical diagnosis, which, I think in a lot of ways, and from what I've seen people say as well, and you see it with, with gay people as well, it's basically respectability politics. It's basically, we need to be seen as, we don't want to look weird to the cis people. Like, we don't want them... If cis people think that we're strange and like those weird non-binary people, or those weird, trans people who don't look like how we want them to, then they won't take us seriously and they won't give us rights. But they don't take us seriously anyway. Like, transphobes, they don't... Well, not just explicit transphobes, but like... The system of transphobia doesn't take, and queerphobia, it doesn't take queer people seriously. It doesn't take trans people seriously. If some, like before Stonewall, there were movements who were, I can't remember the name of it now, but there was one organisation that used to do, I think they were called the Reminder March, which was to like remind people, like remind straight people that gay people exist and are lovely and normal. And, you know, this overlaps with the whole kink at Pride stuff. So yeah, they used to do these marches where they would encourage people, the people who were there, to dress as conservatively as possible and like not even hold hands, because the idea was to present, it was like, we need to show them that we're normal and that we're normal and that we're like them, like, oh, we're not those weirdos that you think we are, you know, you should give us rights because we're not weird, we're normal, good. But like, that doesn't work because they still think that you're weird. And when Stonewall happened, loads of people were like, oh my god, they've fucked it all up, they're never going to give us rights now because they think we're all violent freaks. But like, that wasn't what happened, you know. Yeah, it never works to try and pander to the people who are like the in power oppressors types. It doesn't work to say you should give us our rights because we're normal like you. You know, you should give us our rights because we're not freaks. Like, that never works because they always just see you as freaks anyway. What works is when we say we should have rights and we should be able to live the life that we want because it's our fucking life and because we're not hurting anyone with it, and we should have the right to be as we are and as we want to be and to live as our full selves. And, you know, I know that Calvin Garrett in particular has, and, you know, I think a few other people as well were sort of part of that, but he's definitely caused a lot of damage. Like, I've seen so many, it's so heartbreaking. I've seen so many young trans guys and young non-binary transmasc people talk about how they got sucked into that rhetoric and how toxic it was for them, and how they felt that, you know, some of them felt that they couldn't transition because they weren't trans enough, or they felt that they, you know, they felt pressured, you know, maybe pressured into transitioning when they weren't necessarily ready to or didn't necessarily want to, because they didn't want to be a trans trender. And like, that's just it's so tragic. And that people, you know, you should never like let someone's opinions dictate what you do with your body and what you do with your life, because, you know, it's your life and you've only got one and you've only got one body. And the idea that this really toxic ideology has really permeated trans communities is just so sad to me. But yeah, so in conclusion, I think that, yeah, like I say, if you feel that you're trans, then you are. I think maybe there's space for us to have more of a conversation about what gender dysphoria is and about how we experience it, you know, how different people experience it. And if we don't experience it, what our experiences of our gender are. And I think it'd be really great to have more spaces to have those conversations. You know, back in my day, we did have the internet, but we didn't have social media. And we, you know, I went to this massive queer gathering in a giant squat in Amsterdam, and we hung out for a week and we had conversations and we, like, you know, thrashed stuff out, and I had my brain split open with all this amazing shit. But yeah, and, you know, hopefully we will get to do that. And that, you know, this isn't what I was planning on talking about, but on that note, I have been making plans to do what I'm calling the Museum of Queer Arts, which I'm having to put on hold because of university stuff. I thought I was going to be able to pick up where I left off, but I'm going to have to redo a whole load of stuff that I did before. So that's going to take a while. But anyway, so I am hopefully going to be creating a space where people can have... So it's called the Museum of Queer Arts, but there's also lots of other... It's, you know, it's a space for people to kind of talk about queer, trans ideas and, you know, share their thoughts and the kind of stuff that's like in academia and bring it to the people, all that shit. But I'm going to talk about that in another video. So it's gone on a slight tangent there, but hopefully that's given you a taste of what's coming next. And thank you for watching this. And I hope that you all are doing all right and hanging in there. You can find me on the Twitters, Mr. Crystal Mighty. You can also find me on Instagram. I have 2 Instagrams. I'll put them on the screen. So find me on those things and come and say hi. Do all the stuff and the thing down there. Is that all the stuff? Last time I tried to film a video, I forgot to do an outro, so I hope that this is working right. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna stop. Goodbye.